lot of people ask me what has surprised you the most over the last 5 or 6 months that you've been working in connection with the cases against Donald Trump and Michael Cohen. And I'll tell you that is a pretty easy question to answer, because the thing that has surprised me the most is the complete incompetence that this president surrounded himself with day in and day out for the better part of a decade. You know, he promised all of us the best and the brightest. And what we've got thus far is Rudy Giuliani and Michael Cohen. You know, in years past, I'm a student of history, and in years past, if the President of the United States needed legal counsel, he could call almost any law firm in the country, and within an hour, they would be more than happy to represent the President and provide him with very competent legal counsel. But the thing that's astonishing to me, so surprising about this President is that nobody wants to work with him. Nobody wants to serve in his cabinet. Nobody wants to assist him in his legal battles, and there's a reason for that. And the reason is because he lacks the temperament and the judgment to be the President of the United States. You know, people talk about the fact that they can't believe the United States elected a reality or a celebrity to the White House. That's not the problem. The problem is not that we elected a celebrity to the White House or a reality TV star. The problem is that we elected a man to the White House that did not have the temperament, the knowledge, the experience, and the heart and the courage to lead our nation. That's the problem, not that he's a celebrity. So let's talk a minute about what's going on in the various cases that I'm involved in on behalf of my client, Stormy Daniels. And by the way, I want to make a point, and I know all of you already know this, but is Stormy Daniels the most incredibly courageous woman or what? I predict that when it is all said and done and the history books are written, they will be very, very kind to Stormy Daniels, and rightfully so. So one of the things that came out within the last 24 hours is that emails have been released showing that the officers in Columbus, Ohio, within the last few weeks when she was arrested, I stated at the time that I thought it was a complete setup and it was politically motivated. The charges, thankfully, were dismissed within hours. The prosecutor's office did a remarkable job of figuring out that there was no basis to the charges, but this was only after they had arrested my client, thrown her in the back of a van, made sure that they tightened the cuffs good and tight on her, and made sure the media was there when they unloaded her from the van so they could embarrass her, these officers in Columbus, Ohio. And I said at the time that I thought it was politically motivated. And now we hear and we've seen emails that have surfaced within the last 36 hours, 24 hours, that show or certainly suggest just that. And that is very, very disturbing from my perspective as an officer of the court and as a practicing attorney for almost 20 years, because the United States, here in the United States, we respect, or at least we're supposed to respect, civil liberties and due process. And we're not supposed to use law enforcement for political means. We're not supposed to use the force of the badge to go out and round up our political enemies. They may do that in Russia, but we don't do it here in the United States. So we're in the process of getting to the bottom of that. I had a meeting in Columbus about a week ago. They've promised a thorough investigation. We're going to see if that actually happens before we decide next steps. But we're going to get to the bottom of what happened in Columbus, and if indeed it was politically motivated, and all indications right now are that it is, there's going to be serious, serious consequences for what the police did to my client in Columbus, Ohio, because it has no place anywhere in the United States, period. So let's talk a minute, if we could, about who may perhaps be the greatest recording artist of our lifetime. Michael the iPhone Cohen. God bless this guy, right? I don't know if there's a conversation he didn't record. You know, what I find so beautiful about this is that old adage, you live by the sword, you die by the sword. And Michael Cohen and Donald Trump used to take great care and great joy in Michael Cohen recording Donald Trump's adversaries. And Michael Cohen used to routinely play for Donald Trump various recordings that Michael Cohen thought were advantageous to Donald Trump, and they had great fun at the fact that these folks didn't know they were being recorded. And it never occurred to the rocket scientist Donald Trump never occurred to that rocket scientist Donald Trump that perhaps maybe he was also being recorded. And of course now we know, and we've been saying this for some time, that there's over 100 recordings, not all of them between Michael Cohen and Donald Trump, but certainly more than one, I can assure you of that. And I said this a long time ago, and I'm going to say it again. The problem is that Donald Trump picked a fixer who was neither tough nor smart. And that's a real problem when you're picking a fixer. They need to be either tough or smart, and Donald Trump whiffed on both. And ultimately, I think that's going to prove to be his downfall. I've said it in the past, I'm going to say it again. It's a very dynamic situation. I said some time ago that he would not serve out his term, and I don't think he will serve out his term. And I want to be clear about this. I'm not saying that because I think that they do the activities of Bob Mueller, and I don't think that because I believe he's going to be impeached, but I think the amount of evidence that Michael Cohen is going to ultimately be able to provide to prosecutors in an effort to save his own butt is basically going to bury this president. That's what I predict. We'll see what happens. Earlier this evening, Michael Cohen supposedly has confirmed through, I don't know through whom yet, but has suggested or stated that he is aware that Donald Trump actually was aware of this tower, the Trump Tower meeting that took place relating to the Russians before it occurred. You can probably hear that sound. That's Don Jr.'s pucker factor. So we're going to find out if that actually comes to fruition, but if it does, that is going to be a serious, serious problem for the president and certain members of his family. And I don't know about you, but I'm very anxious to see how that one plays out. Let's talk a moment about, am I okay on time?
Yeah, a few more.
All right. Let's talk a moment about the payments to various individuals in the months leading up to the 2016 campaign. You know of a few of those payments. We'll make a little news here tonight. I'll tell you that we represent 3 additional women that you haven't heard about yet. We're in the process of getting clearance from those clients to release details relating to those payments and the efforts to silence those women by AMI, Donald Trump, and Michael Cohen. And I will tell you that at least one of those women claimed to be pregnant at the time. So we're going to see how that plays out in the coming weeks and months, and I'm going to make a demand now that to the extent that Lanny Davis and Michael Cohen have information bearing on the conduct of Donald Trump relating to these payments or otherwise, including potential criminal conduct, they owe it to each person in this auditorium and each American to come clean now and provide that information. No more games, period. So here's the last thing I'll say, and that is that in the unlikely event that Donald Trump is still in office in 2 years in 2020, and in the event that he decides to seek re-election, I would urge each of you, to the extent that you are voting as it relates to a nominee for the Democratic Party to face him, that you focus on the following question, which I think is really the question as it relates to 2020. That question is as follows. Can the candidate beat Donald Trump in the general election, period? That is the question. Because I will tell you that you can have all the political experience in the world, and you can have all the greatest policy ideas in the world, but if you're not able to beat Donald Trump in 2020, if you're not able to engage in the street fight that campaign is going to be, and it's going to be a brutal one, if you're not able to prevail against him, all of that doesn't matter, period. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. And I'll be coming back to Michael with some questions in just a minute, but let's go to our former federal prosecutor next to maybe help us flesh out some of these issues around Mueller and the U.S. Attorney's Office and everything else. Steve?
Thank you so much, John. It's great to be here in West Hollywood. And I was joking earlier, you know, 2 people are here to see me and the others are here to see Michael. You know, nonetheless, I do think, you know, this Mueller investigation is something that a lot of us hold out a lot of hope for. Yes. And there certainly have been promising signs. So I thought I would just walk through pretty quickly, you know, how that works, what a special counsel is, and what we might expect going forward. I'm acquainted with Bob Mueller. I met him when I was in the Justice Department. Worked with him on and off over the years. So the history of this special counsel thing, we probably all painfully remember Ken Starr and the independent counsel. And Ken Starr, who investigated Whitewater, that was under a different statute called the Ethics in Government Act. And that was passed in 1978 in the wake of Watergate. And then in 1999, it expired. And Congress chose not to renew the Ethics in Government Act. But luckily, Janet Reno was the Attorney General at the time, and I worked with Janet as well, and she was wonderful. But she promulgated regulations that essentially adopted a new program called Special Counsel. And there are some minor differences between the old independent counsel system and the special counsel. For example, the AG, the Attorney General, appoints the special counsel. In the old days, it was a panel of 3 judges. But by and large, it's the same idea. The notion is that when there is a matter that presents a conflict of interest for the Department of Justice, or it's just under the totality of circumstances, it's in the best interest of the nation, then the Attorney General can appoint a special counsel who can independently investigate and prosecute if appropriate. So one legal question, not to make this by any means a law school class or anything, is the special counsel constitutional? And this is not a frivolous issue. You may recall when, and I'm jumping ahead a little bit and I'll come back to the appointment, but when Bob Mueller was appointed special counsel, the president, on his favorite medium, Twitter, said immediately it's unconstitutional what they've done. And they're actually, if you look back when the independent counsel scheme was still in place, there was a case where the administration challenged, that was another Republican administration, they challenged the constitutionality of the independent counsel. And the Supreme Court came out and in a case and they upheld the constitutionality of appointing an independent counsel at that time under that Ethics Act. And the issues are pretty technical, but suffice it to say they sort of fall under separation of powers, and whether or not the Attorney General can appoint a prosecutor when appointing executive branch members and employees, key employees, is really the purview of the president. So the independent counsel was upheld, and as a result, most of us believe pretty strongly that the special counsel would be upheld as well under that precedent. That's a case called Morrison v. Olson. Now, not everybody agrees. The president, as I already said, he doesn't agree. And I think this is just fascinating. It's a little off topic, but there is a Supreme Court nominee named Brett Kavanaugh. And 2 years ago, he was interviewed and he was asked, and I know he will regret this because he'll be grilled about it at his confirmation. He was asked, is there any one case that you would overturn? And at first he said no, jokingly, and then he said yes, Morrison v. Olson. I would drive a nail through that case. So to me, it's very interesting that the president is appointing this judge who has already expressed an opinion that he would like to invalidate special counsel. Now, hopefully he won't have the votes on the Supreme Court. It was a 7-1 decision the last time, but that's something that I think we need to put a pin in. And when you come back now to Bob Mueller as being appointed by the special counsel, so I already mentioned the Attorney General appoints the special counsel, but in this case, the Attorney General is Jeff Sessions. And so you have to stop for a moment and go back to the genesis of this whole thing, which is last March 2017, Jeff Sessions recused himself from the investigation of Russian interference in the presidential election in 2016. And I think the reasons that he did, I think it was proper that he did, but I think it's appalling what the underlying facts are. Jeff Sessions was the national co-chair for the Trump campaign in 2016. And in the heat of that campaign, earlier in the summer and then in September of 2016, he had private meetings with the Russian ambassador Kislyak. And no one knows what was said in those meetings, but we do know that when he had his confirmation hearing in January of 2017, Jeff Sessions testified under oath, I have been called a surrogate a time or two in the Trump campaign. Note he was the national co-chair. But I did not have communications with the Russians. It was a clear statement that he did not communicate with the Russians. And then, of course, it came out that he had these private communications with Kislyak. And of course, he threw up his hands and he said, well, we didn't talk about the campaign. So first of all, I would bet if you went down to Alabama and looked through the cases, I would bet that there are people of color to this day that Jeff Sessions prosecuted that are in prison still behind less perjury than that. I have no doubt about that. And the other thing is, imagine now knowing what we know about how obsessed the Russians were about this election and how the President Putin has now admitted in Helsinki, I wanted Trump to win. And all of the hacking that we now know occurred. Are you asking me to believe that their ambassador went into the national co-chair of the campaign's office and didn't even say, how's the campaign going? How's it looking? Do you guys really have a chance? Especially in September, 2 months before the election. But in any event, Sessions recuses himself, and what that meant was the Deputy Attorney General, Rod Rosenstein, whose name we're all familiar with now, was appointed as the acting AG. And it was actually acting Attorney General, Deputy AG Rosenstein, who appointed Bob Mueller. And how Bob Mueller came to be appointed, even with all of that, is really interesting, because you'll remember what happened is James Comey was the FBI director. And in early 2017, U.S. intelligence officers confirmed that the Russians had hacked our election. And James Comey came out and publicly announced that since the prior summer, since July of 2016, the FBI had been conducting an investigation of Russian hacking and of whether those in the Trump campaign had any role in it. And what that got James Comey, of course, is it got him fired. On May 9, Trump fired James Comey, and we know later he said it was that Russia thing. That was the reason that I fired him. And also, he refused to tell me that I was not a target of the investigation. And that statement where he said the Russia thing is super interesting too, because he said that the day after he fired Comey. So on May 9, he fires Comey. On May 10, he said, Russia is giving me a lot of problems, this Russia thing, but now it's behind me. And what's interesting about that is he said that to Ambassador Kislyak and Foreign Minister Lavrov, two highly placed Russian officials, in a private meeting in the Oval Office where no one else attended. And that sounds familiar now given what happened in Helsinki, but just the three of them met. And the Russians actually have a transcript of that meeting. And that was where he said it was the Russia thing, that was the reason that I fired Comey. So a week later, the acting AG Rosenstein appointed Bob Mueller to be the special counsel. I will move quickly through this part. I will tell you, Bob Mueller is as straight a shooter as they come. He's a Republican, actually. He was a decorated captain, a Marine captain in Vietnam. He's a black box in terms of leaks. He has a team of 15 or 20 prosecutors and a like number of agents and staff that are investigating this case. So he is the right person for that job. And how does the president react to the investigation? Well, he says it's a witch hunt. And he repeats this over and over and over like a mantra. Well, you know, the facts say something different. To date, 30 defendants have been charged in federal criminal indictments by the special counsel, by Bob Mueller. 5 of those individual defendants were persons that were involved in the Trump campaign, and they've all pled guilty and been convicted. And 4 of those are cooperating with the investigation. So you have insiders who were well aware of what was happening in the campaign and well aware of these events that Michael described that are secretly cooperating behind closed doors with the special counsel. We also have, of course, 25 Russian individuals and 2 Russian companies that have been indicted for clear evidence of interference, hacking, theft of emails from the Clinton campaign and the Democrats and the like. And, you know, importantly, this investigation is very much ongoing in terms of that June 9, 2016 meeting with Russian lawyer Natalia Veselnitskaya. Donald Jr. was there, Jared Kushner was there, and Paul Manafort was there. Now, Manafort has also been indicted, and he was supposed to start trial this week, but the judge continued the trial for 1 week. The trial relates to tax evasion, money laundering, and failure to disclose huge payments, tens of millions of dollars from Russian clients that Manafort had. And clearly, the Mueller team is trying to pressure Manafort. These are righteous violations of law, but clearly they're trying to pressure him. One of the co-defendants was Rick Gates, another senior campaign aide. He pled guilty and is cooperating. And one question I would love to know the answer is whether Trump has told Manafort, hang in there, don't turn against me, I will pardon you if I need to. And that, of course, would be obstruction of justice for anybody to do that. But there are some big questions still yet to be answered. You know, I mentioned the legality of the special counsel. That will almost certainly be challenged. Can a sitting president be charged with a federal crime? Turns out the answer to that is almost certainly no. And the reason is that the Constitution, and case law speaks to this, says impeachment is the first remedy for a president who has committed high crimes and misdemeanors. And then he can be prosecuted criminally. So clearly, where this is all leading is when Bob Mueller completes his work, he will prepare a written report that will go to the AG. Hopefully, it will go to the United States Congress. Hopefully, we'll turn the Congress around in November. And we will be able to begin that impeachment. There are also issues like, and this is all uncharted territory, can a president pardon himself? Not surprisingly, there's no case law on that. It's hard to believe that the framers of the Constitution had that in mind, you know, you know, Washington and Madison and Hamilton were sitting around dead. But, I should mention also that the cases that Michael's handled, Michael Cohen, his investigation, the investigation of Maria Butina, a Russian agent who was recently arrested and indicted, those are not being handled by the Mueller team. There may come a point where they'll get involved in that, but the Mueller team is strictly focused on the acts of the campaign as relates to this Russian hacking. And I think my final comment would just be, you know, I think we've all had this sort of suspension of disbelief every day that this person is our president. And I happen to think it's very similar to Watergate. If you look back at history, you know, as there we have a corrupt, dishonest president. As there we have the criminal theft of information related to a presidential campaign. As there we have a massive cover-up, including now guilty pleas of numerous insiders on the cover-up. But arguably this is even worse because this involves our national security, not just internecine political fights. This involves Russia and the hostility that they've expressed for us. So one can hope that the path will either be impeachment or resignation. And I will say I'm with Michael. I don't think a year from now we'll have this president, but I was wrong several times before. Thank you.
So now I'm going to go to Mariana, and I guess I want to set this up by saying I've been really angry since November of 2016. But for the first time in my life, I felt shame. Shame for watching children taken away from their mothers and fathers, that this was the policy of the United States of America. Like, I've never felt shame as an American. I always felt proud to be American. For the first time, I felt shame. So that is the context in which I make my introduction to you, to please tell us, give us some rays of hope that things are getting better. And what's new, Mariana?
Yeah, well, thank you everyone for being here. Good evening. Once again, Mariana. Humane Immigrant Rights. For those who don't know, we are a statewide based organization headquartered in LA. We just opened an office in DC because of everything happening, and we wanted to have more access to be able to react immediately. But you know, as you mentioned, right, it's been something that it's been nonstop since the beginning of not just his term in office, but since his announcement of his candidacy to president. You know, Donald Trump started calling Mexican rapists and criminals. And a lot of us, I think, didn't take that comment very seriously. A lot of us thought it was a joke and didn't think that we would be where we are at today, nowadays. So it has been a journey for organizations like ours that do this type of work with immigrants on the ground on a day-to-day basis. When the election secured, it came as a shock to some of us. But immediately that changed our trajectory, it changed our platform, it changed our strategic plan for the next 4 years, right? Because now we're reacting to different things, to things that we didn't see coming. We went from being proactive to reactive to defensive. So yeah, right now the most recent topic is the separation of children from their parents, which stems from the zero tolerance policy, which turns civil into criminal law for folks who are trying to cross into the United States at the U.S. South Mexico border. And that has led to the separation of children, which are now being placed throughout different areas in the United States. Today was the deadline that was imposed on this administration to reunify all children, all kids, and babies. Some of these are babies under the age of 5 with their parents, and the administration failed miserably. There is no set, detailed outline strategic plan as to how our kids will be reunited with their families. And that is the work that all of these organizations, not just GLAB, but many orgs throughout the state and throughout the country have taken on. Obviously, there's capacity that we have, and we only have so many attorneys in our organization that can be on the ground helping these folks, but we're doing what we can. We also partake in other ways to inform the community, such as community education, because these are very issues that are coming just to light for some folks. We want to make sure that everyone is well informed about what is happening and what is going to happen down the line. What's new, I guess, in regards to that question? I feel like every day is something new in the world of immigration per se. Actually, actually tomorrow we might hear another decision in regards to DACA, the cases that have been happening in regards to deferred action for childhood arrivals. For some of those who aren't so familiar with that program was enacted by President Trump in 2012. It was a program that sought to protect those known as dreamers who were brought here before the age of 16 and were 31 years old or younger at the announcement of that program, to provide them with a social security, a work permit, but most importantly, protection from deportation. I am actually a DACA beneficient. I have had DACA since 2012. And on September 5th, 2017, as we all know, President Trump terminated DACA. From that came several lawsuits, some here from California, from UC Regions, which that led to the injunction being placed in January 9th of 2018. Prior to that injunction, folks whose DACA or work permit expired post March 5th were not going to be able to renew. What that means is thousands of immigrant youth being left in the United States without status, without protection from deportation, and that is also family separation, right? We talk about family separation at the border, but we also have to realize that family separation is occurring at its highest levels internally in the United States as well. We have raids happening where there is collateral arrest. The administration has made it seem as it is only targeting quote-unquote